Good morning, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here. This is the 7th year that Archbishop Philip Freier is hosting conversations at Federation Square, so it's great to get the year started again. My name is Heather Chitrangelo. I'm an Anglican priest in the Diocese of Melbourne, and it's my great privilege to facilitate our time together this morning. I begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nations, and I pay tribute to the elders. This morning's conversation will explore the key reasons why children turn to crime. The media reports that child crime is on the rise, putting governments under pressure to be tough on juvenile crime. Today, the Archbishop hopes we can develop better understanding of the factors that lead to young people offending and explore effective prevention measures. With reported rises in family violence and breakdown, and the recently released Gonski report showing a link between low levels of achievement and educational disadvantage, particularly among students from low socioeconomic backgrounds and Indigenous backgrounds, how can society better safeguard the well-being of its most vulnerable young members? To help us explore these issues today, we are very pleased to welcome our guest speakers, Judge Paul Grant, who is President of the Children's Court of Victoria, and Paul McDonald, CEO of Anglicare Victoria. Judge Paul Grant is a graduate of Monash University in Arts and Law. He was admitted to practice as a solicitor in 1979 and to the bar in 1980. His Honour worked as in-house counsel for Slater and Gordon before being appointed a magistrate in 1988. Judge Paul has held positions as Deputy Chief Magistrate and Supervising Magistrate for Koori Courts. On 26th of April 2006, His Honour was appointed a Judge of the County Court, and on the 1st of May 2006, President of the Children's Court of Victoria. His Honour is currently a member of the Aboriginal Justice Forum. Paul McDonald is currently CEO of Anglicare Victoria. Prior to this, he was the Executive Director of Children, Youth and Families Division at the Department of Human Services. There he oversaw the state's child protection, youth and family services, domestic violence, sexual assault and concession programs. He also headed the department's Drug Policy and Services Division, and prior to that he led major community welfare organisations in the areas of homelessness, crisis services and drug and alcohol services, including as Director of Salvation Army Crossroads. Mr McDonald is Chair of Australians for Affordable Housing, a member of the Anglicare Northern Board and Vice President of the Centre for Excellence in Child and Family Welfare. Judge Paul, Mr McDonald, we are honoured to have you with us this morning and look forward to hearing from your experience. But for now, please join me in welcoming today's speakers.
Well, thank you, Heather, and thank you for the two Pauls who are going to appear and discuss this really important topic today. And I thought we might start by setting a bit of a picture, because there's much, as we heard in the introduction, that we sometimes reading we have reason to be concerned about, but just where does Victoria sit in the national and in the wider context of juvenile justice? And perhaps His Honour might give us a pen sketch of that.
Yes, well, I think there is a lot that we should be proud of in relation to our youth justice system in Victoria. I think we sometimes read stories that tend to indicate that our young people are behaving very badly, and I think the reality is that they have behaving no worse than any other generation of young people have behaved. The figures are interesting, Archbishop. We know that there are 550,000 young people in Victoria aged 10 to 17. And that's the group that could potentially come into the Children's Court if they were charged with criminal offending. And recent research from the Sentencing Advisory Council shows that out of that 550,000, the police processed 14,500 young people. And Out of those 14,500, a significant number were diverted away from formal court process through programs like police cautioning, the ropes diversion program, Right Step. So in fact, in the year that the Sentencing Advisory Council did its analysis, which was 2009-2010, there were 7,000 young people who had charges proved in the Children's Court. 7,000 out of 550,000. And out of that 7,000, there were 1,500 young people who received supervisory orders and 172 who received sentences of detention. So there are, in fact, a very small number of young people who we worry about, who we're concerned about, and who we need to support by way of supervision, and in the worst case, who end up in detention.
And how do those rates compare with other jurisdictions in Australia?
Well, Victoria has the lowest rate of young people on supervisory orders in Australia, lowest rates of young people in youth detention in Australia, and importantly, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, the second lowest youth offending rate. So that's a good message, I think, for all of us to understand. We don't have to lock up young people to reduce the crime rate. And in fact, in New South Wales, where they lock up young people at about 4 times the rate we do, their crime rate for young people is just a little bit higher.
Paul, still reason for concern within that overall low capture of young people in the juvenile justice system, the detention system here in Victoria?
Yeah, we've got a good story in the sense of the history of the juvenile justice system has been strong, but still reason for concern. Archbishop, I mean, who's sitting in detention? Who's being detained in a YTC? Well, most will be male. About 12% will be Aboriginal. About 40 to 50% will be either on current or previous orders of child protection or involved with out-of-home care or both. Most will be in there because of alcohol or drug use, and 10%, and then there'll be different cohorts, maybe 10% of the Islander community, and so forth. This is the group. That group of who either are on supervision orders of the 1,600 or the just under 200 who may be detained at any one time in the YTC. That's the group that we need to concern ourselves about how to get them out into work, into activity and alternative pathways. And I'd have to say that historically juvenile justice has tried to think, it's been one of the most reforming areas of welfare. You know, when you have a look at child protection, out-of-home care, family violence, sexual assault, it is juvenile justice that's always tried to think differently about how to create pathways out from a sort of a career of criminality. And I think of late there's more concern about what to do with that hard nut group of young people, about how we can actually show them alternatives other than the pathways that they've taken up to date.
So let's just look a little bit more at that group who, I think you said, 40% have been involved in some sort of government intervention. Yeah. What's the kind of interventions we're talking about, typically of people who come before the court? What sort of involvement have they had with government, other regulatory authorities, right from their earliest life?
Well, the points that Paul make are timely points because each year the Youth Parole Board does a snapshot of the young people in detention, and in fact the movement of young people out of child protection into youth justice is alarming because the figures are in fact a little bit higher than Paul suggested. The latest report of the Youth Parole Board showed, I think, that 35% of detainees had previous child protection involvement and 16% of current detainees have current child protection involvement. So that's 51% of young people in youth detention have had previous contact with child protection or are on current child protection orders. So that's a group that we have to work with intensively, and I think in an innovative way as well. We have to look at how do we respond to this young group of children who've come from circumstances of disadvantage, of abuse, who themselves are often victims of very serious crimes and who carry that experience deep within them.
Because perhaps we'll just stop and just explore a little bit what a child protection intervention might be, because you'd sort of almost intuitively think that if you're meant to be protected by the agencies of government and those who serve, part of that protection would be keeping you out of the criminal justice system. So just perhaps could we tease out a little bit of what that would look like? What kind of child protection orders people are under, but they're still somehow getting caught up in the juvenile justice system?
Well, there's orders that range from supervisory orders in which the child remains at home but is supervised by the state, and that supervision would look like something like this. There'd be an allocated child protection worker. They'd be visiting the home maybe once a week, more likely once a fortnight. They'd be involved with trying to develop a case plan. Then it moves up to custodian and guardianship orders, in which at times when the child protection would see that the abuse, neglect, concern of the child is at risk, that in fact further harm will be taken if they remain with the parents, then they'll be removed. We've got about 5,500 kids in out-of-home care at any one time. Archbishop, there's about 11,000 kids in the child protection system at any one time. But I suppose child protection, the term child protection, protecting the child is the act of making an assessment where the child should be, what sort of care arrangements should be put around to protect any further harm. But look, as someone who was overseeing the system for a number of years, we would fall short of the mark at times because of the demand on the system. Paul would say that the rise of child protection orders coming into the court at the moment are just spiralling. We've got about 27% increase, I think, from the Gippsland area alone coming into the family division of the Children's Court. And so managing that inflow with a set number of workers, you're going to have some children who will be unallocated or not allocated a case load, and some good care will be managing. But I sometimes say the role of child protection is not only managing, or the role of organisations such as also Anglicare out-of-home care and other organisations, you're not only managing, you're raising these children. And if I could probably sum up some of the test of what's the system done to the child. Now, many do come through and go on and lead good lives, and there's been many stories around about children growing up in foster care and out-of-home care and done well. But on those leaving care, and there's about 400 every year who leave care. There's a study that had a look at just over 25% of those, and where they saw, and had a look at them after the end of 12 months. Of those, half were either in jail, homeless, or new parents. And so, have we built stepping stones into a successful young adulthood from their time in care? I think we've fallen short of the mark, and we continue to do. And I think these young people and children who have come up through the care system should get the gold pass. They should get a gold pass in relation to access to housing, in relation to employment assistance, or free ways into vocation and training. And we just tend to fall short of the expectation of what any child would expect from an adult system if they're going to, if we're going to look after them. And that's, we're compromised because of demand and response. And sometimes we get a little bit caught up about fixing gaps. We've got finding placements rather than thinking about, the trajectory of the child needs to be upward. How's their education going? Are we keeping them in school? Can we throw a bit of work at them? Those sort of things.
Because I suppose statistics don't tell us everything, but it sounds to me from what you're saying that there's 11,000 in this child protection system, and they're likely, or they're much more likely, that they'll form half of the people who actually get involved in the juvenile justice system, and with about the same rate as the other 540,000 of their age peers who aren't. So there's a
much more likely.
It sounds like a very greater likelihood if you're already in that kind of child protection system in some way or the other, subject to an order.
Well, of course, once you are on a child protection order, it means that a court has made a finding that the child has suffered significant harm as a result of physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, or neglect. So obviously, once we've got a child on an order, the child has already been through incredibly difficult experiences, and we have to support the child in the best possible way that we can. But one of the hard things for the system is that the demand is rising. And I've just got some figures, and the figures don't tell everything, but they're really quite crucial, I think, to any debate in this issue, in this area, because in 2002, 4.3 children per 1,000 were on child protection orders in Victoria. 10 years later, it was 5.4 per 1,000. But throughout Australia, the figures rose from 4.6 to 7.6. So whatever's happening is not unique to Victoria, but the workload of the Children's Court had been rising on average over the last 8 years at the rate of 6% per annum, except for last year, where our workload grew by 13%. So we need to ask ourselves, what is it that's driving more and more families into the hard end of the system, the back end of the system? And I think a lot of the recent reviews that we've had of the system have reminded us of the importance of trying to expend money at the front end of the system, intervene earlier, support families in need before they become families in crisis. And that's really become a motto for some of us in the Children's Court, because we are seeing the families in crisis, and we're really hoping that there can be interventions to stop a number of those families getting to us. That's what we would really like to see. An investment in the front end of the child protection system in areas of prevention and early intervention. And I know that these are, to some extent, buzzwords, and we've been talking about this for a long time, but we need to take it seriously. And we also need to understand that supporting children in need is not just a matter for child protection or community agencies or the court. It's a matter for the whole community. It's a matter for education. It's a matter for housing. It's a matter for health. These are all important issues. If 12% of our detainees are young people who are registered with intellectual disability services, then we should be delivering better services to those young people. If 36% of young people in youth detention have mental health issues, then we need to invest in the mental health system in a better way than we're doing now.
So it sounds like there's, in terms of the interventions, a need for a greater integration of resources. Paul, you've been in government, and you know the desire sometimes to bring things together, but what are the organisational things that work against the kind of, the focused attention we're hearing? Probably makes sense from all the information we have.
Bringing departments around this issue is the toughest game in town within government. It's very, everyone talks about whole of government and everyone comes around with good intention, but getting kids in out-of-home care who are going to school, there's about 3,000 of them, right? Finite number, 3,000. Getting a school system to say, do something special with that. Hang in with those kids. Let's see them get through to year 10, year 11, year 12, because most drop out year 9. The education system would say to me, and I've heard in the past the secretary saying, yeah, Paul, but I'm moving about 600,000 kids in and out every day of the state system. They're only 3,000. Well, yes, true, but those 3,000 will be our long-term criminals of the future, if we don't get onto it, will be our needy on our welfare, will be our families that will have children that will come back into the child protection system. You know, the upriver costs for those sort of that 3,000, if we don't get it right, are enormous. And so, getting big departments like that engaged in the story of these sort of children is tough work in government. But I think we've just got to have a mindset, probably, you know, with this Premier Napthine, who's got good history in youth justice, and you know, he used to be a Youth and Family Services Minister, and he's you know, my past experience, and unfortunately I go back as far as he does, you know, he those times he gets it. So I'm encouraged that he's the Premier, because I think we've got to, rather than talk to the systems, what are we offering children under the state care, under our watch? What guarantees we're getting them into young adulthood, and why can't we bring those services around that child? Maybe we should be actually, you know, locating the care of these children, the sense of sort of their outcomes, sitting in Premier and Cabinet as a measurement. You know, every day I wake up, Archbishop, I know what's happening in the stock market, I know what's happening with the, you know, the All Ordinaries Index, whatever that means, but I don't know what's happening with young people.
Yes.
You know, we've got 500,000 children living in homes where neither parent's working. We've got 40,000 young people between 16 and 25, not at school, not at training, not at work. I mean, those sort of numbers are the motivating, and the role of government is, in fact, actually to look at the most vulnerable and to protect them. Not get into middle class welfare, not get into the worried well, but get into those cohorts and say, what are we going to do special for them? Because they need government and organisations and community sector to actually, everyone needs to get together to sort of catapult them into adulthood. And it takes a lot to get there.
Paul might have another insight on this as well.
Well, I completely support what Paul said about the importance of education, because again, from where I sit in the Children's Court, we know that a lot of the young people who we sentence to periods of detention are completely disengaged from school. And indeed, the report of the Parole Board shows that 2/3 of detainees have been suspended or expelled from school. And when they're at school, often some of these young people, their behaviour is very bad. My wife's a teacher, and she says, Paul, you don't know what it's like sometimes. Some of these kids are very disruptive and they're very difficult, and you know, it's a great thing for our school not to have them there. Well, it's not a great thing for our community not to have them in school. We need to have better responses for young people who are disengaging from school.
So it sounds like we've got something of a paradox, though, that there are at times quite intensive interventions. And I suppose putting a young person in detention is a very intensive intervention, but
and costly.
And very costly. But there are other opportunities that it looks like we might be, in your views, you know, a little bit relaxed about. We're not really pushing as hard on those upstream opportunities as much as we should, or resourcing kids who need support as much as we should.
Look, two things, and I should say, you know, it's good that the school has been developed, has been established in Parkville. You know, I think that's a fantastic step forward, and even hearing the reports of kids not on the screen, but talking about reading books.
Well, just talk about that, because people here might be unaware. This is actually an innovation to have a school in the youth detention facility.
I mean, go figure. I mean, an innovation of having a school and a youth training centre. Who would have thought? Of course, but we haven't done it. And we did it, and you know, the stories coming out of there of, you know, rather than sitting and watching the screen or fiddling your thumbs or laying in the slot looking at the roof, I mean, what are we doing? And then getting out for exercise back, we're sending them off to school while they're doing doing their months of sentence and things. That's a good start. The other bit, Archbishop, though, it is about school, but it's about access to work. Gone, you know, the jobs in the past are the wrecking yards, the petrol pump, you know, tangible things where kids who didn't want to get into school could get into sort of that low-skilled work or labour, or even if they didn't like school, we used to have the tech school system. And I don't want to go back to the future, but everyone was a winner. The current school system is, if you don't make it through, you're a loser. But we used to find those kids who didn't want to do the academic We provided them with a school trajectory that was all about hands and, you know, the trades and things like this. We've taken that out. We've asked, you've got to achieve in there or you don't get on. I think what we need to do is have a think about, well, what are the, you know, what's the employment pathways for young blokes sitting in Parkville, coming up in front of the judge and saying this? What are the direct employment pathways to say, well, let's pitch a job. Let's subsidise an employer 3 months and say, put this kid on and see what happens. You might find that we'll get 40% of them staying with it. You might find that the boss quite likes and puts the kid under the wing and say, I'm going to hang in with them. We're lacking that type of tactile intervention for these young people. And, you know, look, I had a young girl come into my office 3 weeks ago. I knew from the St Kilda Crisis Centre days, and she was in and out of jail, and the judge probably saw her about 15 times and all sorts of things. But she came in together in the flat, got a couple of kids with her. A couple of kids aren't with her, but she's got a couple of kids. She's got routine, predictability in her life. And who would have thought? I would have thought that she's just, you know, going to have a career in Fairley and that's all. They do, with the right interventions, can, you know, do too. It's not sort of once they turn 17, throw up your hands, it's all too late. We are impatient about young people and their grab of opportunity. And I think we should be more patient and repetitive in the opportunity offer, and we'll find that young people will take that up sometime in the future. But, you know, we run out of steam too quick.
I think there's two things I'd pick up out of that. The first one I'll just ask His Honour is this whole question of to what extent does the modern era of disclosure and criminal history checks and all those sort of things, to what extent is that kind of a legacy or a weight that young people carry having gone through the juvenile justice system?
It's a significant problem. Years ago, employers would ask young people if they went for work, have you been convicted of any offence? And the fact that you were convicted carried a very significant stigma. But the courts had a capacity to make orders without conviction. And that meant that that was an acknowledgement, really, that this was a young person that needed a chance and didn't need to have a conviction recorded against them, and they could get on with their lives without having to disclose this experience. Now young people are asked not have you been convicted of any offence, but have you been found guilty of any offence, which means that in the Children's Court, where 70% of our orders are without conviction, young people, if they go for work, still have to disclose, well, yes, actually I was found guilty of a particular offence. The court didn't convict me. I was released on an undertaking or a bond, but yes, I did do this. Now, that seems to me to be counterproductive. If the court feels that this young person needs a chance and needs to get on with their life and not have a particular mark against them, then we shouldn't be requiring young people to make these sort of disclosures, because it's more likely than not that an employer will say, I will not employ this young person because they've been charged with an offence, but I will employ this one who hasn't been, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And I think it's one of the great redemptive narratives of Christianity, that you can have an unblemished future irrespective of your past. And I suspect that we've got a real danger in capturing behaviours of young people and letting that in our own minds shape what we think their future looks like.
And the thing about the behaviour of young people is that it is impulsive, that it often occurs to impress peers. It's almost thoughtless, opportunistic. And we have a children's court and we have a different system for young people because we understand that and we know that we should treat young people differently. They're still developing. Their brains are still developing. The science now shows that for most young men, they're really not fully mature or adult until perhaps 25, and young women 23. But historically we've known this, and that's why we've built these systems of separate approaches for young people. Cut the young people some slack. Recognise that they haven't got old heads on young shoulders. We need to acknowledge that young people are sometimes going to do some stupid things. And we know that most young people grow out of criminal offending. All the research shows that all of us, heaven forbid, even me, when we're young, have done something stupid, something wrong, something we regret. And we need to be understanding about that and recognise that for the great majority of young people who get into trouble, we can divert them away from court, or if they come into court, we can make orders that focus on their rehabilitation, enable them to get on with their lives without really any significant sanction. And that's a great strength of the Victorian system, but again, we have this hard core of young people whose life experience has been so savage, so severe, so difficult, that they've ended up behaving in very bad ways, and we have to look at how we assist them in the best possible way we can.
Right. It's the behaviour of adults that I worry the most about, Archbishop, rather than the behaviour of young people, really. And, you know, it's the behaviour of, you know, dads realising that they're mentors to their sons, and that maybe the old sort of ways that he used to or he grew up with are different, or what are they being passed on, and mums the same, and just the adult community and our tolerance or not tolerance. It's, you know, these are children, these are minors, you know, and you know, there's been some high-profile criticism of cases in the past or stories in the media, you know, and we're, you know, vilifying young people who are 17 who are in fact minors, you know, and where are the adults in all of this? Where's their tolerance? Where's their patience? Where's their change of behaviour in relation? And you know, many of the boys and girls in front of the judge every day are products of family environments in which they're seeing some of the rules of engagement, they're seeing about this, and families need further support. And I think what's interesting is that we need to, there's a program that's just been recently funded, and in fact Paul and I were talking, Paul was talking about one of these cases coming before him recently, which is great to see, called Cradle to Kinder. And it's providing us an ongoing support for 4 to 5 years of a mother with a baby, but a vulnerable mum. This baby's on the cusp of being taken into child protection, but can we put a number of services and a worker around that person's life, or that young mum and child's life, for the next 4 years, not for 12 months where the welfare system sort of, let's support a kid for 6 months, 12 months, we think we've done a great job, but for 4 to 5 years. And change that mum's story, because I can tell you the mums that are involved in that program were child protection clients when they were kids that were taken up by their mums, removed. And this program says, no, that doesn't have to be your history. We'll change that history. And all of a sudden we're seeing these young, vulnerable mums getting more and more confident with their ability to be a mother the longer the baby stays in the home. But it does need outside support. It needs some heavy lifting from the service system, but you can pull it off. And I think that, you know, my concern about behaviours of young people is, well, the behaviours of, you know, where's the behaviours of adults? Reminds me of that Punt Road sign. I don't know if everyone's seen it. It spins around on Punt Road, and I've forgotten what it is, but you know, it's from the alcohol industry. You know, don't blame the grog, blame the individual, something like that. You've seen it? It's just an outrage. You know, that, oh, we take no responsibility for making drinks available to 16 and 15-year-olds. No, we don't put a pink because we know they like pink. You know, pink fuzzy drinks. We do it because, you know, the 19, 20-year-olds will drink. I mean, no responsibility there about the involvement, and how many to do with alcohol and drug abuse that are detained at the moment? 80-85%. What's fueling family violence? Grog. Yet we're hard on young people, but do we want to have a go at the grog industry? Well, I don't see much assertiveness and aggressiveness toward the grog industry about this. This is where I think, that's why I say the comment about, well, it's the behaviour of adults, and have a lot to do with how we're producing and raising our children and young people.
Well, let's just move to, I suppose, some policies that are constructive to do interventions and prospectively helpful for young people. It's probably very easy for people to hear a tough on crime message, and I suppose most people have heard that often gets spoken of around electoral cycles. What kind of messages should people hear concerned that we as a society do better things for young people? What kind of messages should they be being alert to that represent some good policy directions?
Well, certainly from the point of view of the court, I think one of the great initiatives in the court system over the last few years has been the establishment of Koori courts. I've been actively involved in Koori courts at the Magistrates Court level, at the County Court level, and at the Children's Court. And I think that one of the great things that those courts have done has opened up a dialogue between the courts and Aboriginal communities. And you might say, well, why would you need to do that? And the answer is because we've never really done it in the past. And what had tended to happen in the past is that Aboriginal people had seen courts as places where they either went to get locked up or they went and had their children taken away from them. And I think we've seen a real change over 10 years in the relationship between courts and Aboriginal communities. The strongest supporter for Koori courts are Aboriginal communities. Original Justice Agreement Part 3 has endorsed the expansion of the Koori Court program. It's brought elders from Aboriginal communities into the court. It's meant that courts have engaged Aboriginal young men and women as Koori Court officers. We have a Koori Court unit. So the relationship between courts and communities has changed dramatically. And in a little court like Mildura, where there was staff of, say, 8 people, to now have 2 Koori people working in the court means that for that community, the court's now a place where you can actually go because you know that there are people there you can talk to. You can go if you need protection because you need a family violence order. You can go if you need a compensation order because you're a victim of crime. So it's changing the relationship between communities, and I think that that's a really positive development. And we have to do this sort of work because Aboriginal people are massively overrepresented in the court system, both at child protection and at youth justice level. So we have to look at different ways of changing those overrepresentation rates. And I'm not naive about this. Just because we build a new court model isn't going to solve the problem of overrepresentation. We're not going to solve that unless we get Aboriginal people better health, better housing, better access to employment, and maintain young Aboriginal boys and girls in school. We need to do all of those things. But I think Koori courts is one example of thinking outside the square, creating a new model that works.
Archbishop, a third of juvenile offending comes from 2.2% of the postcodes. A third. Now, when you think about that figure of 2.2% of Victoria's postcodes are producing a third of juvenile offending, then you start thinking about, well, have we got the service system right? Now, I observed the Gonski debate and the education debate, the private schools saying, oh, we want our piece of the action, and the worried middle class state secondaries, oh, we want our piece of the action. No. Let's have a look at the postcodes of disadvantage and pump Gonski into those schools. Why not that? Let's not all think of ourselves as, I want a piece of that, I want my tax backed off, I want, No, we've got to get a grip. We're doing all right here in this country for most of us. We are lucky. It's time to share that luck, not take this even... I can't believe how Australian politics has moved to the middle. The role of government has always been about bringing the bottom 10% up. And one example of Gonski and the distribution is only just one of a number of distribution ways of funding. We can say, let's take a postcode approach. Tony Vincent in his book, Dropping Off Over the Edge, I think it's about 8-10 years ago, Archbishop, doesn't date, go and read it. Things are still the same, says that there's across Australia about 72 postcodes that are deep disadvantaged and 48 core. And here in Victoria, we've got our fair share. I'd go to those postcodes, talk to the state government and say, and they did do something quite, well, Wendouree West or Wendouree East out Ballarat about that, and government all got together and did lift that community for that period of time. 10 years ago. But, I think this is how we've got to do it. We've got to actually understand these kids who are doing crime just don't pop up in front of the judge and say, look, I woke up one morning and I thought I'd just thieve a few cars and things like that. They are products of their community, and until we invest in those communities, they will continue to be in front of the judge presenting their, themselves to him.
you're both very passionate about what you do. Which is a great thing. I think it's very inspiring. What sustains you in your work? You've been the chief judge in the Children's Court for 8 years. I know your time's
7 years.
It's coming up to a conclusion soonish. But what sustains you and given you the passion for what you do?
Well, I think as a very young man, I was fortunate to have parents who encouraged me to strongly believe in values of fairness and justice. I had an experience as a young man of moving from a fairly poorly resourced state school to a very well-resourced, what's called public school, but it's really a school that you can only go to if you can pay for it. And the experience was very challenging for me in a number of ways, not least of which I'm very grateful for the education I had. It was, and the sacrifices my parents made to do it, but it just made me realise that all children should have access to the sort of education that I was having access to, and I couldn't understand why we ran systems which had very good education for some children if you could afford it, and perhaps not so good education if you couldn't. And so that has been something that I've carried with me, that sense that we've got to do things in a fairer way. And also being engaged in the law. As a young man, I was a volunteer at Legal Services, Western Suburbs Legal Service. I have a very strong belief that one of the great things about our system is our system of law and the system of rule of law, and the fact that everybody should be treated in the same way in the law. And so these are values that are sort of deeply ingrained, and I couldn't walk away from. And so when I went to work in the Children's Court, I'd had knowledge of the Children's Court because as a magistrate I'd worked in the Children's Court, and I'd also been on committees like the Child Death Review Committee. But it is so obvious to those of us that work in the court, the Children's Court is the court of disadvantage. Work done by legal aid and quoted in the review of the system by the Victorian Law Reform Commission shows that 71% of the families investigated by Child Protection are low-income families, and 66% of the families are families who are in receipt of benefits. So we know that children in certain families are struggling. And I just want to be clear on this. I'm not saying just because you are poor you're going to end up in the child protection system. We know that's not true. There need to be other factors that operate in your life. There need to be family violence or drug and alcohol issues, or often it's mental health or intellectual disability. But a combination of factors bring people into our court, and they are the most disadvantaged in our community, and we need to respond in a better way to assist those people.
And Paul, we're going to soon just turn to have some interaction with people who are here this morning, but what sustains your passion over different sorts of operations within government and now in a large community sector provider through the church? What gets you up and going through to be passionate about this every day?
I don't know. I've just always had an optimistic view that we can. It's not an unrealistic view. I just think we can. You know, we've got the capability of influencing and changing things. You know, I had a good life. I had a good upbringing. I was popular. I was did things like that. But I always observed that others weren't, or others were discarded, or others were put on the side, or weren't in the glow. And I always thought it was because of my luck, I should be utilising that, or not necessarily luck, but my abilities and capabilities and influence to get others to have the opportunities that they rightly deserve. And Yeah, that's always been, it's never been a burden. You go to functions, people ask you at the party, what do you do? Oh, I'm running child protection. Oh, that must be terrible. Geez, you poor thing. And I'm working in homes, so I'm running St Kilda Cross. And oh, gee, how do you do it? You poor. No, I've never. It's fantastic, and particularly with young people and children. I mean, they are just. They're always up and going, even against all the crap that they're living with. They want to have a go at something. They're energetic, and it's fantastic. So I've just always, thought, lend my skill, what I can bring, to get the glow of the spotlight on their story and how we can, and through my influence and. The judge and I we nearly had the game set up. I was head of child protection, he was head of the children's court. We'd sit around, we'd have these things. We did some good things, and we're just reminiscing that it's a different story at the moment. But we did some good things, and it's great to hear the judge talk like that. I just want to recognise his 7 years as president of the Children's Court. Victoria is in a better place as a result of those 7 years, and hopefully, the next person who fills those big shoes will have the same outlook as the judge. And there's always things to do, but I think we've seen, developments and paths and growth, and it's an incremental game, and it's a tough game, but it's no good, yourself who's involved in the game, myself who's involved in the game, getting all depressed about it.
Well, thanks for both of you sharing something of your passion. We're going to have the opportunity of some interaction with observations or questions.
Ian Knight, you mentioned how important education was in young people, particularly those that have been offending. Do you think as a society that if we reinstated the technical school training system from a practical teaching point of view, it would help young people that are more hands-on orientated?
I'm Stephen Leslie. I'm a principal of a small independent school. I'm also chairman of Breakaway Camps, which works with disadvantaged kids. My question, I guess for you, Archbishop, is how does the Anglican Church at a parish level actually get involved to intervene with what I think we've had described as dysfunctional families, generationally dysfunctional families?
Philip Newman, the issue of racial profiling, you mentioned Indigenous people and you mentioned Pacific Islanders. Are there any other particular sections of our community determined by racial background that need a particular attention and care for their younger people?
Look, I'll have to go the first one soon. I mentioned it. I don't want to be accused of back in my day type thinking, but I do think there is merit for having a more diversified mainstream education system to keep more young people in it. I do notice some schools are taking themes, and my wife's a teacher at Melbourne Secondary College, which is seen as the secondary college of sport of excellence, and they've developed that whole thing about sport. And other schools have done their other themes, but I think we actually need it more structurally. Recognise that maybe some of these young people aren't going to make it through to their 17. They're not going to make it to the year 12. So I want them to be winners at year 8 if they're going to, and winners at year 9, not feeling, I failed school, so what's next? So that's why I thought the technical school pathway offered an alternative, a winning pathway for the kid that couldn't handle. And I think it's worthy structurally of revisiting about how many children we're not keeping and what could a mainstream school education system look like. The second thing I'd say, and look, just on the school thing, it's not only about the school, it's about us. Look, each night of the week at Anglicare, I've got about 350 kids in foster care each night of the week and another 60 or so in residential care. So there's about 400 kids each night under our watch. it's our job also to bring, to encourage reading at night and, and doing the homework and doing those things. And we as community sector organisations need to make sure we're doing our bit to support the education. In family homes, parents are doing it all the time. So the sector needs to actually bring that sort of thinking within the, outside the 9 to 3 arrangement. But I do think, we are a little bit dormant in our thinking about diversifying mainstream education, make sure we can capture all. And certainly we can capture those who have been out of school for some time, proactive ways of bringing them back in. Not letting them realise, oh, maybe I'll go back, but reaching out and bring them back into the school system.
Just perhaps mentioning something about how the Anglican Church responds in answer to Stephen's question. I think primarily we'd see parish communities as communities of hopefulness and places where people can come and have a participation and experience an intergenerational dimension of life, which for some people is enriching, and it's something they mightn't have in their other experiences of community. I think we live in a community these days which is often very stratified. The experience that people have is a bit single generation, almost of a cohort of people who are rather like you in age. And ideally, church communities are ones which are across the whole age spectrum, where people can find some knowledge and wisdom of elders and can engage with the energy of youth and in a way which is a great thing. And so I think for some people, participation just in the worshipping life of parishes is enriching in that way. It actually gives them a much more of a whole experience of the complexity of human relationships that we probably all need to grow and be shaped well. We have a number of partnerships with our very great and professional community service organisations like Anglicare and the Brotherhood of St Lawrence. Often they're in communities of multiple disadvantage, and so sometimes we've got tutoring systems, sometimes we've got early intervention systems to work with parents so that their children can get some early learning. We've spoken about that in some other contexts. Some of our parishes actually have focused youth services. We have a parish in Emerald which has a focused youth service called ECHO, which is about youth facilitation, youth training. So I think that there's a number of things we do, and I suspect even an event like this morning is an attempt that we make as a church to widen out some of the understanding, because it's people like, in the end of the day, people like you, rather than just saying issues about the future of young people in our society sits with the court or sits with a professional service provider. I think we're wanting to say it sits with us all, and we all need to take the kind of responsibility we can to make a contribution. And I think as Paul was touching on earlier, just the kind of role modelling, the mentorship, someone who has some life experience to actually be engaged with young people and just help them reflect a bit on what they're doing as they're able to. And sometimes we've got those experiences in our churches, in our neighbourhoods. Sometimes, with work colleagues, they might have children who are they're really at the end of their wits about, and you might be the person a bit outside of that sphere who can actually do something constructive. So I think that in those broad terms, they're the kind of ways I think that we're wanting to engage constructively and support people in what are obviously some very difficult circumstances.
If I could just comment briefly on the first question, because I agree with all of what Paul said about the need to have a more diverse educational system, a system that responds better to young people, and particularly young people who don't want to go on to university. I don't know if we can just rebuild what was a good system, the tech system, and one of the reasons that we may not be able to do that is because for a lot of the young people who would go into that system, there may not be work. I think there's been a significant change in our economy over the last 30 or 40 years. When I was a young man, a lot of people from the community where I grew up went to tech schools and got apprenticeships in the manufacturing industry. Of course, there's been such a significant change in our economy with a reduction in our ability to manufacture that some of the things that young people went into are just not available. So we need to understand that when we're trying to work out build the schools to make the future, because at one level we're going through the school to help us get into the workforce, and so we need to make sure that the schools are equipping young people to get the jobs that they need to be able to do. Just on the other question around whether there are any other communities that are perhaps overrepresented in the court system. Well, I'd say the other community, the other group of people that struggle are newly arrived people coming into Australia, whether they're African, Burmese, wherever they're coming from. It's a difficult adjustment sometimes to life in Australia. Some of the young African men that we see in our court have been through very difficult experiences, spent a lot of time in refugee camps, come from a third world to a first world, and I think the adjustment is difficult, and we need to think about how we make their lives a little bit easier, that transition from fleeing a country where there was civil war or incredible difficulties or hardship, coming into a refugee camp, spending their time there where it's incredibly difficult, and then landing in Melbourne. You know, for some of those communities, that's very difficult, especially for the young people in those communities.
My name's David Nolte. With regard to healthcare for children, at Parkville, paediatricians don't go there. They have a developmental type of bent. It's usually forensic psychiatrists, and that really concerns me.
Thank you. My name is George Powell. I'm nearly 82, former principal class, secondary schools in all the postcode areas that you've mentioned that we're underprivileged. The point I'd make is, how do we build decency and empathy back into our society, and how do we educate our educators to fulfil that role?
Thank you very much for this conversation. My name's Simon Gardner. I'm the manager of a statewide service for Forgotten Australians called Open Place. Forgotten Australians are those now adults who were, when children, brought up in institutional or orphanage care. And the Senate report suggests that there were, and there still are, 500,000 of these adults in Australia now. 50% of our prison population, according to the Senate report, is made up of these adults who, as children, were in the care of church-based and state agencies. My question is to Mr. McDonald. How does your agency ensure continuing care for children when they leave your nurturing, quasi-parenting, out-of-home care programs?
Perhaps start there if you like.
Start on that one? That's great. Thanks, Simon. Well, a number of things. Here's the limitation of the system. With a child in foster care, there's an expectation by the state that once they reach 18, they leave. At Anglicare, we are looking at the business case of actually saying to any kid that comes into our foster care that that place is there till you're 21, just like any other normal family home, and 25, and parents in this room would say, well, my son's 33 and he's still in the bedroom out the backyard. Yeah, and I think we've got to replicate as much about family life as we can as a service system. And so it is actually quite costly to actually, people say, well, why wouldn't you do that, Paul? Well, 21. Well, because we've got, it can be quite costly. But, we've got costly problems all over the place. It doesn't mean they're insurmountable. So as one example, we want to replicate at Anglicare as much about family life with our foster carers, with our out-of-home carers, that happen in the community, that it can happen. So when a 12-year-old comes in, I don't have to worry about where I was 18. I mean, my parents said, Paul, this has been a great relationship, but see you later at 18, I would have fallen off my chair. I hadn't even put a dirty clothes in the washing basket by the time I was 17. That's the thing that we're expecting these kids to get on. So one example is that we'd like to extend at Anglicare our foster care guarantee for our kids right into the 20s. The second thing that I'd say is that we've developed a couple of programs, one called Breaking the Barriers, others in which we put employment and recreation and support workers around those leaving care to try and right those or reverse those figures that I was saying earlier about half end up in prison, half unemployed, half are new parents. And the third thing is, if you're good and influential in their lives, they'll come back when they're down on their luck. And that's what I think we want to be as an organisation, that we'll have a continuing presence as long as we're relevant, that they'll come back. That girl who came back to me, she was 32, who came back into my office and just dropped in and said hello, and she wanted some assistance on something else, but not, something to do with her organised routine life. She came back. Now, if we can have sort of impacts of our relationships on these, when they're down, they come back. I mean, the trouble about some of the development of welfare programs these days is there's a long list of the reasons why we want this program just to do this, and so it ends up being not an inclusion list, but it's an exclusion list. And I think what we've got to make sure that we're available on the journey. And the great thing about juvenile justice is the kids that I've known in the juvenile justice, they go, oh, remember Mr. Such and Such, or remember that, the relationship that happens between the child and the juvenile justice program has been lasting, because I bump into those adults who have done time in prison and they still talk about that time and still talk, you reckon he's around because I need this or that? Part of our role is to provide that ongoing assistance every now and then right through. And your question coming from those who out of care, those who have been in care, the final thing I'll say, we've got we call them heritage clients, but we hosted a lunch for all the adults, and they're average age about 60, 65, who are in our homes in our homes in Brighton and in our homes across Melbourne and Gippsland. And we hosted a lunch, and we bring them in for lunch, and the stories they told. And I suppose I could only reflect that I think the system has moved on, that we're a lot more caring, that we're a lot more careful, that we're a lot more gentle on raising those lives than we were in the 50s and 60s and 40s, because the stories that sitting down at lunch and them telling me about the experiences they had are real beacons or real motivating points for us to say, let's not get it wrong this time. Let's actually really build a life that they can go on and have a long-term life, not have a life trying to get over the abuse that they received as they being a child.
And Paul, do you want to just cover that question about, I suppose, the impact of mental health issues, and I think the implied suggestion that there's more influence by forensic psychology, that field, than by developmental psychology in the way that young people's needs are informed or met in the system? Oh, sorry. Yes.
Well, certainly we're very fortunate in the Children's Court that we have access to clinical support that comes to us from the Children's Court Clinic. The Children's Court Clinic is directed by Dr. Brown, who's a very experienced forensic psychologist, and her staff there are predominantly psychologists, and we are able to refer young people for assessments, and we rely on often the assessment by Dr. Brown. If we're told that she thinks there might need to be a psychiatric assessment, she might organise that, but most commonly we rely on the advice that we get from forensic psychologists. But I just want to say that, again, the snapshot from the Youth Parole Board shows that about 40% of detainees have mental health issues. Now, it's hard to define whether the young person that's in the centre has a specific mental illness, because we're reluctant to impose those diagnoses on young people. But there is no doubt, because we see it, that a lot of the young people we deal with are significantly disturbed, and they need much better support, much better intervention from experienced people, psychologists, and in some occasions psychiatrists. What we know is that there are not enough experts out there to support young people. If we want to get someone into adolescent forensic health, there's waiting lists. And so I think one thing that I've become aware of over the last 7 years is that we have been investing a lot more in adult mental health. We need to invest a lot more money in child and youth mental health services and supports. But one of the other things about this is, because it touches on a second question, which is around empathy. I would say now that 9 out of 10 detainees are in there for serious offences of violence. I think we're very good in Victoria in diverting young people away from detention if they've been involved in property offences. But understandably, because one of the things we have to do in the court is recognise our responsibility to protect the community, a lot of the people we detain, and they're not large numbers, but the ones we do are usually involved in offences like armed robbery, intentionally cause serious injury, recklessly cause serious injury, aggravated burglary, really hard, serious, violent offences. And one of the alarming things about the young people when we get reports on them is this lack of empathy, this lack of victim empathy. We're very worried and concerned that a lot of the young people who end up in detention have themselves come usually from experiences of violence, abuse, which means that they have no sympathy towards others because no sympathy has been shown towards them. And so I think dealing with that issue of empathy for that really hard-end group, who have had such hard lives themselves that their experience is no one's cared for me, so I don't care about anybody else, quite frankly. And usually, that's hard to wrestle with, and we need expert support to deal with it. How do you build back into someone's life a sense of respect, empathy, sympathy, when they've got to the stage where they think, well, I'm not going to school, no one cares for me, no one supports me, my family life's been absolutely hopeless. And in fact, they're not things they're thinking, but that's their experience. They've had such a terrible life that often their behaviour represents that. And how you turn it round, it's really hard.
I think we're up against our time. Would you join with me as I just have this prayer to ask God to raise that awareness, because I think empathy and decency probably starts with us most of all, and as we consider the important issues we've raised today. So if you'd like to join with me in this prayer, please join in saying Amen at the end. Loving God, we thank you for young people across the whole range of their experience. Those in the vast majority who go through their teen years without involvement in problems that bring them before the attention of the police or the juvenile justice system, and especially in the context of our discussions this morning, those young people who, a small minority, but those who are involved in the juvenile justice system, praying that there might be interventions which can make a difference to them, their families, their communities, that can help them be formed in all those ways where they can take a responsible and a good participation in society, which is good for them and a blessing for those around them. And we know there are difficult and troubling circumstances in which young people find themselves and actions that they take, but we pray that we as adult members of our society might also have a vision and a love and a desire for these young people not to be constrained by the experiences of these unhappy things in their teen years, but see them grow into full participation and to flourishing. So we pray all this in Jesus' name. Amen.